Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to TechEd 2004 in sunny San Diego. Glad to see it is now sunny, as we'd expect in Southern California. Hope you're looking forward to a great week here at TechEd. Lots of experiences, lots of guidelines for you to learn from. Hope you enjoyed Steve Ballmer's keynote this morning. I thought that was great. As an IT security guy myself, I really enjoyed his stress on security and reiterating Microsoft having security as a #1 priority. I'm Michael Sharp, a director within our IT security group within Microsoft IT. And so therefore, like many of you, I struggle with the day-to-day challenges of security and how to keep Microsoft secure. Today I'm going to try and talk to you about what we've done internally to try and keep ourselves as free as possible from hackers and malicious software. Four main areas I'm going to talk to you about. Firstly, before you can secure your environment, you need to understand your environment. Secondly, what are the key components of a security strategy that you can use to help you consistently make good decisions about security? Thirdly, what are some of the top priority risks? What are some of those threats that have been keeping me awake at night, keeping my colleagues awake at night? And what have we been doing about those threats? So what solutions, what tactical controls have we been using to address those risks? And lastly, how have we organized so that we can effectively manage security on a day-to-day basis, but also looking to build for the long term? Very good. Let's go forward. Within Microsoft, we have a globally distributed network, over 400 buildings. Many of those buildings are at our Redmond, Washington campus, where about half our employees are based. So that's a large environment of employees. Some of our smaller sites have only 4 to 5 sales and marketing employees. We are a company that is somewhat addicted to email. We process about over 3 million email messages per day. I get a couple of hundred a day, so dealing with all of those is a challenge too. We're very connected from a wireless and mobile standpoint. Over 7 million remote connections a month. And those different types of connections add up to that number. So you have full remote access to the corporate network, or RAS. We have access via Outlook web access to Exchange server, or via RPC over HTTP from Outlook 2003 to Exchange server as well, and various other methods from other mobile devices. So a lot of different ways people connect to our network to get information and to collaborate. We have almost 90,000 end users, about 55 to 60,000 employees, plus a number of contractors and vendors, and we're in 89 countries. One of the numbers that's the biggest challenge from a security standpoint is that one in the top left-hand side of the slide. We have over 300,000 PCs and devices. You're probably thinking, that's a lot of devices given how many end users you have. One of the reasons is, as a software development company, we have developers and testers who have multiple machines. They actually need multiple machines on their desk in order to do their job. And also we have a number of large lab environments for testing, for running builds of the operating system, builds of new software. And those environments, those labs often have thousands of machines in them, hence the large number. From a security standpoint, what are some of the environmental challenges? Well, let's first talk about those 300,000 devices. They're split into managed and unmanaged. By managed, I mean they're joined to a domain that is managed by Microsoft IT. So we can push domain policies to those machines. We can manage the security configuration of those machines. We can touch them in order to be able to get them into the state we need them to be to stay secure. And that's about 200,000 of those 300 fall into that category. The other 100,000 are what we term unmanaged. So they are being managed by different individuals in the corporation who don't want Microsoft IT pushing domain policies and configurations down to those machines. If I'm in charge of the build lab for Windows and I'm rebuilding 1,000 machines every day for testing, I don't want domain policies being pushed down to those machines. It's going to ruin my tests. So we have to allow that to occur. Hands up who has challenges with business partner connectivity. Good show of hands. We have similar challenges to yourself. With two different ways we address it. Firstly, with a extranet, so a separate forest and domain we've set up with separate credentials that allow business partners to access applications, access databases, so that we can share information and collaborate. Another way is, as you'll have seen for some of the end users from the previous slide, we have a number of vendors, partners, contractors who get an account on our network because they need access to a number of the resources on the network and need that full account. The next point's not one we're particularly proud of, but it is a fact. We think of ourselves as the #1 hack target in the world, at least in the private sector. So everybody wants to hack Microsoft technology, and what better place to hack it than at Microsoft? So we have a lot of people trying to intrude on our network, trying to compromise it, and that represents a lot of challenges on a day-to-day and hour-to-hour basis. Some of the additional challenges we face, some of which you may face as well. We have a culture based on autonomy and on agility. Autonomy, we have a lot of highly technically literate people in our employee base who like to think that they know how to manage their machine, they know how to manage its security configuration, and they don't like anybody, especially someone from internal IT, telling them how they should be managing their machine. Agility. A lot of us work in businesses that going through a rapid pace of change. The technology industry is certainly one of those. And our business needs to be able to adapt to changes in the marketplace. When you need to make changes in the business, you often need to make changes in your IT to support the changes in the business. Well, our challenge is making changes in IT, but keeping them secure while we make the changes. We have a lot of mobile clients. We have our wired corporate network and our wireless corporate network, a lot of thousands of access points for both. And we're now finding that we have more wireless clients connecting to our network every day than we do wired clients. Well, if you've based your model, as we did historically, on managing security on the wired clients, the wireless clients present a little bit of a different challenge. If I find, for example, someone doesn't have a patch on their machine and I want to shut down their port, well, that's pretty easy if they've got a wired connection and they plug it in the wall. It's not quite so easy if they're on a wireless connection, because how do I go about actually shutting them off from accessing the wireless network? Different challenge. Because of our requirement to support software development, we need to allow various resources, various labs to not have our policies pushed, as I was mentioning earlier, and to support what they need to do. So there's quite a bit of give and take between Microsoft IT security and some of those business groups in terms of how their security is managed. Lastly, within Microsoft IT, we think of ourselves as the first and best customer for Microsoft. So we are there up front discussing with our own product teams what requirements and what security requirements we have for the products that are going to be developed. We're there to help with testing the alpha and beta products as they come out, to make sure that those products are as good as they can be before they're released to our customer base. The challenge there is making sure that with some of those early versions of products, we're not exposing ourselves to additional security issues that haven't yet been addressed because they are pre-release products. So we work closely with our product groups to make sure we can manage through that. What are some of the key components of a security strategy? First of all, you need a mission and a vision for what do you focus on every day and where are you headed. You need a set of operating principles that guide your day-to-day decision making. A decision model that is based on risk assessment and the prioritization of risk. And an ability to prioritize which risks are you going to address with technical controls and various other solutions. And I'm going to walk through each of these pieces in the next few slides. So our mission within corporate security in Microsoft, we're looking to protect both our intellectual property and our productivity. So we want to prevent any prevent our intellectual property getting stolen or preventing the productivity of our employees getting impacted. So the IP piece really refers to stopping hackers. The productivity piece refers a lot to stopping us getting exposed or exploited by malware that has a big impact on the network. And we do that through a risk management program that focuses on assessing risks, communicating risks, and then looking to mitigate those risks to our digital assets. On a day-to-day basis, we follow sort of 4 key components of a traditional risk management program, whereby we look to assess risk, then to define policy, so modify existing policy or define new security policy, and have that reviewed by the right people, have it rolled out. Real-time monitoring of the network for intrusion detection, for other types of anomalies, and then managing any incidents related to those. And lastly, auditing to make sure that our environment is compliant with those policies that we've set up. And we look to do that auditing both on a project basis, so auditing various pieces of our infrastructure for compliance with policy. So we might take the remote access, the RAS infrastructure, and we may audit that every 12 months to check it's in compliance with policy. But also more nearer real time, so every few hours scanning the network to look for vulnerabilities such as the lack of patches or for weak passwords. When we think about our vision, we think about it very much from a IT client standpoint. So as an IT client on our network, what can you expect out of Microsoft IT and out of security? And we look at that in terms of the 5 trustworthy assurances that you as an IT client on our network can expect. First of all, that my identity is not compromised. And that talks to the right level of authentication and authorization associated with someone's identity. Secondly, that the resources that I want to access are both secure, so they're free from unauthorized access, they're free from malware, but also that they're available. They're available when I need them so that I can stay productive. I can think of lots of great security controls that would keep resources secure that would heavily impact productivity. Like if I have a problem with remote network access, I could shut off remote network access. That would make it really secure, but it would kill the productivity of the mobile employee. From a privacy standpoint, we need to ensure that everybody's data and their communications are appropriately private per the settings that the user has, and also any relevant regulations governing PII. As a user, I need to ensure I understand my role, I understand my accountabilities, and that they're clearly defined as to what am I accountable for with relation to security in the enterprise. In other words, corporate security aren't the only people that have an accountability for security. And lastly, I can expect that I'll get a timely response to risks and threats, so that if there, for example, is a particular exploit out there that I could get impacted by, I should get information on what do I need to do to make sure to get myself protected from that. For example, installing a new patch, for example, installing a new antivirus signature. What guiding principles do we use in order to guide our decision-making on a day-to-day basis? Management commitment is a huge part of this. We have, top-down management commitment from our CEO to our CIO, way on downwards, that helps us manage risk according to business objectives. And that's making sure we get a balance between addressing risks but helping to keep the business running. And we define key organizational roles and responsibilities so people understand what they need to do. And I'll talk more about how corporate security relates to the rest of Microsoft IT later in the presentation. For users and data, least privilege is a key concept for us. The main area we think about that is authorization. Who has authorization to particular assets? If they're very sensitive assets, then we need to make sure that only the smallest group of people with a need to know have access to those particular assets. For privacy, we'll strictly enforce any regulations and any particular privacy policy that we define. For application system development, I'm sure a lot of you know it's important to build security into development lifecycle. What we established was an Application Security Assurance Program, also known as ASAP. The ASAP acronym is not designed to imply any speed of the program, but that's the acronym. And that program makes sure that before any line of business application is developed, that we assess what level of risk does that application have. If it's an application that's going to contain PII and be connected to the internet, that's a high-risk application. We need to be very, very careful about the security of it. If, on the other hand, it's an application for a smaller work group, it's not connected to the internet, the information isn't as sensitive, we may put that in like a medium or a low classification. And we use that high, medium, or low risk classification for an application to decide how much rigor goes into its development. For the high-risk applications, a lot more rigor will be gone through the process, a lot more checkpoints, design reviews, code reviews, and we'll make sure that it gets a comprehensive attack and penetration audit before it's allowed to go into production. And if there are any severity 1 bugs associated with that, then we'll make sure they're remediated before it can go into production. Lead defense, key term. Make sure you look at the perimeter and different aspects of the inside of your network, but also focus on key assets as well, and I'll talk more about that later. Reducing attack surface is a key thing we drive for. For example, if I've got 60,000 accounts that I believe have a particular vulnerability, if I can reduce that 60,000 down to a few hundred, I haven't eliminated the risk, but I've certainly reduced the attack surface for that vulnerability to get exploited. And lastly, we need to make sure that we integrate security into the operations framework so that on a day-to-day basis, we ensure that operations and security are in sync and we know what to do when there's an incident and how to handle that incident. Looking at risk from an overall perspective, we think of risk as either being acceptable or being unacceptable. The y-axis sort of shows risk from the perspective of impact to the business, as defined by an asset owner, the owner of the digital asset. And the x-axis is defined by our security team as what's the probability of a particular exploit occurring. And what we're looking to do is to drive down our overall level of acceptable risk, as shown by that yellow shaded area. And we do that by assessing risk, and those that we deem to be unacceptable for our environment, what controls can we implement that can drive the overall level of risk down to more of an acceptable level. And clearly, those impacts that you're probably going to be more happy to accept in your environment are those that have the lowest probability of exploit. So we think about risk and risk posture from an overall standpoint. Two more slides here on risk analysis. When thinking about risk analysis, we think about some different asset classes or different vectors. So we think about in terms of hosts, applications, accounts, trusts, and networks. Well, why do we need to focus on all five? You have to focus on all five because compromise of one of these can lead to the compromise of the other four. For example, if I can compromise an account, then potentially with the right credentials, the right privileges, I can then compromise the host. I could compromise access to an application. Bar a trust connection to a different forest or domain, I could compromise resources or accounts in that other domain or forest, and even the network. So it's critical when assessing risk to think about all five. Traditionally within Microsoft, we had a lot of focus on hosts, we had a lot of focus on applications. But we learned that we had to focus on the other aspects as well to make sure that more recently we've been focusing on accounts and trusts, and then even more recently on the network layer, to make sure we have all five pieces adequately covered. Drilling down a little bit more on some of the components of risk assessment that we use. First of all, thinking about it from the impact to an asset, you need to be cognizant of what is the asset that you're trying to assess, how valuable is it to you, and what is the threat. So what are you afraid of happening to that asset that would be a bad outcome for your business? Put those two together, gives you an impact to the business of a particular threat occurring. So if your HR data of a sensitive nature was stolen and exposed on the internet, what impact would that be to your corporation? When thinking about probability, we look at the vulnerability. So how could the threat occur? How would a deviant person go about exploiting that vulnerability? And then what current controls do you have in place that are reducing that risk and are mitigating the ability for someone to exploit that vulnerability? So when we put the two pieces together, the impact and the probability, that gives us a current level of risk for a particular exploit against a particular asset. And that is, what's the probability the threat will overcome the controls to successfully exploit the vulnerability and expose the asset? So we go through this to assess risk and then prioritize those risks to decide which ones to act upon. Now to talk a bit more about process in terms of how we work risk management across the different pieces of the organization. We think of corporate security's role as being one of prioritizing risk, so assessing risk and prioritizing risk. Secondly, to legislate security policy and define security requirements. And thirdly, to check compliance against policy, make sure our infrastructure is in compliance with the security policies that we've set. We work with the other teams within Microsoft IT to work on security solutions and initiatives. Those other teams include our client services organization that focuses on global help desk, regional IT account management, and on client software deployment. Our organization that focuses on engineering and operations, and the fourth component of IT, which is the line of business applications, our business unit IT groups that work on the development and maintenance of all of our line of business apps. We rely on those teams to be the ones that will select the specific security solutions based upon our security requirements and implement those solutions via coordinated projects, and then maintain and sustain those solutions. And the reason we do it that way is that we've learned the lesson the hard way. Security can say, this is what we got to do, and try and ram it down the throats of the IT folks, but that doesn't get a lot of buy-in from the rest of IT. And really, you want those projects, those solutions owned by the people who are running the IT services. So if I want to implement a solution in a remote access infrastructure, it's best to have the service manager for remote access being the one that selects the solution and implements the solution in the infrastructure. One of the key collaborations that we have in this area as part of the process is shown by that rectangle, is that we jointly prioritize which risks we're going to address, which technical controls we're going to implement between security and the rest of IT. In fact, we have a steering committee composed of our CIO and his direct reports, his general managers, who meet on a regular basis to look at what are the key risks, what are potential solutions, and which ones to select to implement. So we have to look at key questions such as, how worried am I about a particular risk? How much is a particular security control going to cost? What will be the residual risks? So what benefit am I going to get from implementing that particular solution? How much does it cost to maintain the solution? We've had a few surprises in terms of how much it costs to maintain a solution when we thought the actual implementation cost was reasonable. So once we've selected those solutions, they get implemented, and then those sustained operations, we check compliance of the solutions within corporate security. So that's the overall process and cycle we go through to work through managing risk across all of Microsoft IT. I talked about managing risk, trying to assess risk and prioritize for the whole environment. Well, different pieces of your environment have different risks that are more or less applicable to them. Some risks I have for the data center are not necessarily the same top risks for the client space. So we need to think about the different environments, such as data center, client, and we've split client between the managed client and the unmanaged client, I was mentioning earlier, and the remote access space, and all the mobile users that we have. So we think about what are the appropriate policies, security requirements, and mitigation tactics that are appropriate for each of those environments to make sure we have the right focus in each environment. Now I'll come on to talk about what are some of the risks? What are some of the things that have been keeping me awake at night? What are some of the things that are similar things I'm sure have been keeping you awake at night? So firstly, hands up who's worried about patching their environment. Pretty good unanimous show of hands. We're very worried about patching our environment too. So that's probably the number one thing we've been worried about for, I'd say, the last couple of years is patching our environment. Back in January of 2003, along came Slammer. And Slammer impacted Microsoft quite heavily. And why was that? Because we had a number of machines that were exposed. We had a number of SQL databases that were not adequately patched to protect against Slammer. Was that because we didn't have the right tools in place to help, the right technology? Not really. It was really more of a process issue. We had some tools to deploy patches, but we weren't being hardcore enough with pushing those patches out and making sure that people were remediated if they didn't have the patch. So we went through a process that we call SER, or Secure Environmental Remediation, to make sure people get patched. So when we get a patch, when MSRC issues a patch bulletin, we look at that patch, and we look at the critical patches, sorry, and we decide what's the deadline we're going to put down for implementing that patch. Typically, the deadline we'll put down will be 14 calendar days, or 2 weeks. And that notice will be sent out to everyone in the corporation saying, you got to be patched within 14 days. Sometimes, that doesn't happen very often, but sometimes we view one as more of an emergency one. So, for example, if we believe there's exploits in the wild that are going to be there very soon, we may say 2 days rather than 14 days, but mostly it is the 14 days. We then approach the patching from two different ways for the client space and for the server space. For the client space, we send out an email to everybody that says, please patch your machine. Here's the link to Windows Update to go install the patch, and please do it by the deadline. We'll follow that up by SMS 2003 running to detect lack of patch and install it if it's not already there. For the server space, we rely on our data center operations folks in conjunction with the BUITs hosting the line of business applications to implement the patches at the right time. Clearly, as you know, if you're running servers in the data center, you've got to schedule in when you're going to implement the patches. You can't just say, let's do them all Wednesday at noon, right? You have to schedule in so you have the minimal impact to the business as you do it. Well, once we reach that 14-day deadline, we're then scanning the network every 4 to 6 hours, and any machines we find that are vulnerable, they will get remediated by either in the client space especially, we'll force patch them, or we'll shut them off the network. And we shut them off the network by just shutting off their port for their wired connection. So we're pretty hardcore about that. Our CIO has criticized us only when we're not hardcore about going ahead and shutting people off if they're not patched. The view being, if they've had the right amount of notice and they've had the ability to get patched, if they didn't, then they get shut off and they need to get remediated. That's how we've generally dealt with the patching issue. We use MBSA, we use SMS 2003, and we use some other custom tools that we have as well. Next risk area I'm going to talk about is those unmanaged devices. So I have about 200,000 of the managed devices, and I've got 100,000 unmanaged devices. Well, why am I really worried about those unmanaged? I'm worried because those unmanaged devices, whose security configuration I can't manage very well, they can more easily get infected. I think there's a higher risk they could get infected. they could then connect to one of my managed devices and transmit that infecting my managed device. So I'm concerned about unmanaged device connecting to managed device. So we've looked at a way of segmenting the two through IPsec, and I'll talk about that in, I think the next slide talks about that in a bit more detail. For remote and mobile users who are accessing the network via RAS, remote access service for full corporate network access, I'm concerned about their security configuration. I mean, that could be a home user. That's a machine that never comes anywhere near my Microsoft Office, but it's a machine they use for remote access. It could be their laptop or their tablet that they've been traveling with for 2 or 3 weeks. Excuse me. How can I have an assurance of the security state of that machine? And what we've done there is we've looked at ways to enforce certain security configurations as someone connects to the network. And again, I'll talk about that one some more in a couple of slides. Single-factor authentication, username and password. For us, username and password is just not enough to protect our network. We discovered, to our pain, back in October 2000, that single-factor authentication was not enough. It's too easy for hackers these days to scan home machines, pick up credentials, and then use them if all you have is single-factor username and password. So 2 areas that we are using two-factor authentication today is for remote access. So for remote access to a corporate network, you must use two-factor. That's using smart cards, and I'll, again, a couple of slides later, talk more about that. But also for domain administration access. So if you have an account and it's a separate privileged account than a user account, we don't allow user accounts to get, domain privileges. So with your separate domain privileged account, that account is also secured using a smart card. So you can only log on with domain admin privileges if you have a smart card for that log on. And where are we headed? We believe our vision is that we will have two-factor authentication for all log-on. So where we're headed is the use of two-factor authentication. Even when I'm in my office, just sitting at my computer needing to log on, that will be two-factor authentication as well. So two-factor everywhere is where we're headed. Another reason for that is passwords. Passwords are a problem for all of us. We make password complexity so complex that it's, you want to make it hard to guess, you also make it hard to remember, right? Who's ever reset their password and had a problem remembering it afterwards? Yep, happened to me recently. Reset my password, sat at a meeting, and about 20 attempts later, I actually remembered what the password was. So I managed to avoid the call to help desk. When talking about layers earlier, a key part of that is focusing controls across your key assets. Obviously, one of our most key assets is our source code. So for the last 2+ years, we've had a series of projects called the Managed Source Initiative, where we've looked to better secure our source code. Rather than having each of our product teams individually managing their source depot servers where they're storing the source code, we've been moving those servers into one centrally managed team that can ensure better security for those servers, but just as importantly for our product development teams, better availability for those servers. And if there's any downtime, it's more predictable. After all, our product teams are not experts at running IT, they're experts at producing software to help run IT. We've also implemented better authorization techniques. So there's a very much a least privileged technique for access to source code. So you start off by saying, who needs access to Windows source code? Well, start off with 0, nobody, And then every single person who wants access needs to request access via a tool, and then they need to get the right set of approvals before they're given access to the tool. And we configure that such that if you're a full-time employee in a particular group, you may get access for a year before it expires. If you're a vendor working on a temporary basis, you may get access for only 2 months before that expires, and you need to re-request and get re-approval. So really managing that access to source code from a least privilege standpoint. Also, we use IPsec and certificates to make sure you're only accessing the source code from the right machine. So not only do you have to be the right person with the right account accessing the source code, you also need to be using machine that has been approved for accessing the source code by machine name. So that's another piece we put in place to make sure source code is well managed. Of course, we also care about the binaries that we are going to release to all of our customers as well. And there's been a program running through that area too to better secure how we manage those binaries, how we assure they're virus-free, make sure they're appropriately code-signed. And code signing, again, requires two-factor authentication to get that code signed. Moving on to a bit more detail on, one more thing before I move on. We manage, or sort of program manage, all of these initiatives via a program called Embody Trustworthy Computing. So that's our internal program where we're trying to embody the trustworthy computing principles into our IT environment, and we program manage all that under that umbrella across Microsoft IT and across Microsoft. So the network segmentation of the managed devices versus the unmanaged devices. As mentioned, we're looking to mitigate that risk to the IT-managed computers, and we're looking to provide that capability to control access at the network level. In order to do that, we needed to define what that IT-managed computer population is, and that's essentially all computers that are joined to an IT-managed domain. And then we want to segment those IT-managed computers from the unmanaged ones with using a network layer boundary. Also allow IT-managed computers to have the ability to restrict network-level access to a subset of IT-managed computers, and that's something we've done in the source code area, as mentioned earlier. What this enables us to do is to prevent those unmanaged computers from initiating connections to an IT-managed computer. The only way those connections can be initiated when you put your managed computers into IPsec require mode is from the managed to the unmanaged. You can't initiate the connection in the other direction. And IPsec is the only technology available, as we're implementing this, that supports all of our security requirements. So we've rolled it out domain by domain during the last 3 or 4 months, and we're just at the point of completing it this month for those 190, 200,000 managed computers. So talk a little more about that remote access security. We're concerned about malicious users and malicious software on a remote machine. For the malicious users, as I mentioned, credentials are too easy to steal and to use. So we implemented two-factor authentication and smart cards for remote access. So everyone has a physical access card, but also on the back, I know most of you can't see it, there's a little chip there, and on the chip we store a digital certificate that will be part of the two-factor authentication. So if I want to remotely access the network, I have to have obviously a PC of some type, I need to have the card, I need to have a reader to insert the card into, and I need to have the CSP or cryptographic service provider. That's the piece of software that cryptographically talks between the operating system and the card. And I need to know the PIN for the card, so that when I try and access the network, I insert the card in the reader, put in the PIN, and then I will attempt a connection to the corporate network. What happens is it connects to the Radius server, passes the certificate information to that server, and it then compares that certificate information for me, Michael Sharp, to my certificate information that's stored in the Active Directory. So when my certificate was issued, a copy of that certificate was put in the Active Directory. So those two are compared, and if it shows, yes, it's Michael Sharp trying to access, then I get in. I can't use somebody else's card in order to provide access. I have to use my card. And what that solution enabled us to do was reduce that attack surface of over 60,000 accounts who have remote access down to probably about 300 on an ongoing basis. So we reduced the attack surface by about 99.5%. We do have a few exceptions on an ongoing basis. From a manageability standpoint, the cards break sometimes. That's why I have mine in one of these little plastic holders, because I fiddled with it a bit too much one time and broke it. And we make sure we issue these to everybody. Or you can lose the card, you can be traveling and get stolen, whatever occurs. So we need to have a process to allow exceptions for a temporary basis, 24 hours, 48 hours, so you can still access the corporate network if you have an urgent business need whilst you get a new card. And we've distributed issuance offices around the globe, so we have about 50 different locations in various countries whereby you can go to get a new card if it's broken or stolen and you need to get a new one. Thinking about malicious software, how our network could get infected from malicious software, which has occurred many times. In fact, for every time we've had a major malware impact to our network, be it historically Code Red, Nimda, Slammer last year, in tracing it back, it's been a remote access user that has infected the network. So it's a real threat that we have to address. So our requirement is to enforce a certain configuration onto that remote system. The way we've done that for our short-term solution is via the connection manager and some tools provided in the Windows 2000 resource kit, and some custom scripts that we wrote to check the configuration of the remote machine. We check things like internet connection firewall is turned on, internet connection sharing is turned off, that you've got the latest antivirus installed. We use Computer Associate G-Trust. So that latest antivirus is installed. You have the latest signature file, and it's actually turned on. Useful with your antivirus to actually have it turned on. We check that you've got a strong password for your local administrator account on the machine. So a password of administrator for that account is not acceptable. If you've got SQL on the machine, we check the password for that, and various other configuration pieces. Some of these checks occur before you access the network. Some of the checks occur after you access the network. So that's the short-term solution that we have in place. And those checks for, say, for if you're broadband enabled with an internet connection, those checks will probably take, no more than 20 to 30 seconds. If you're a dial-up user, as I have been from the hotel last night, then those checks, they can take a minute or two to actually run through. So I talked about that being the short-term solution. Where we're headed with this is that we're working with our product teams to work towards the vision we have, whereby for remote access, for wired access, and for wireless access, that will use the same method of isolation or quarantine, such that when you want any type of network access, your machine is checked for a certain bill of health, and if it passes the bill of health, you get full access. If it doesn't pass the bill of health, then you don't get full access, and you're diverted off to a different subnet, different environment, whereby you can get remediated before you get the full access. So that's the vision in terms of where we're going. We really view this as a stopgap, short-term solution to get us some assurance of remote system configuration before we get there. Hands up who has issues with wireless security. Good showing there too. Well, we had quite a few issues with wireless security. We put our wireless network up probably about 5 years ago, 802.11b based. And we found a couple of folks in the parking lot who are using our wireless network for free. Any of you who've used wireless networking at home, many of you, I'm sure, have noticed that your neighbor's wireless network is readily available for you to use anytime you choose. So, as being Microsoft and a large corporation, that wasn't the type of free internet access that we were thinking of for somebody outside the company. So we went ahead and implemented a number of wireless security measures based upon the 802.1x protocol and the extensible authentication protocol with transport layer security. We use those for authentication. We use web keys that are issued on a session basis to encrypt the traffic. And we use certificates to support the authentication. So in order to get wirelessly connected to our network, you actually have to be connected to a wired connection first. And you have, with that wired connection, you get automatically enrolled for both a machine certificate and a user certificate from our self-hosted Microsoft PKI. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the slide. And so when you attempt to connect wirelessly, it does authentication via the user mapping to the certificate in the Active Directory to make sure that you're the right user, you've got the right certificates, and you can use the wireless network. And one plug I wanted to do for another session was that related to Active Directory. I mean, Active Directory underpins many of the security measures that we've implemented at Microsoft. So it's a great session tomorrow. I think it's at 5 o'clock for Active Directory security. It's code WIN305. What we've also done is prohibited the use of non-IT managed wireless access points by policy. So it said you can only, the only wireless access points that are allowed are the ones managed by Microsoft IT. And we enforce that through scanning for rogue access points. That scanning's been somewhat manual, someone actually walking around trying to find wireless access points. Some of you may be familiar with that somewhat low-tech method. And we're also now looking to implement some tools that will be able to do that much more automatically. Secure messaging. So we have concerns over the security of those 3 million plus emails that we're sending around the corporation. So there's two ways that we've addressed our secure messaging challenges. Firstly, for non-repudiation, and that is for ensuring that, you know, I can't deny that I sent an email to you. And for encryption of emails, we use SMIME. And traditionally, we've used SMIME with certificates just on your machine. We're now piloting SMIME with the certificates actually on the smart card as well. So we'll have that two-factor authentication that you have to have the smart card and the PIN in order to get access to your private key. Of course, it uses as you may be aware with SMIME, it uses a public and private key pair. So when you're doing, when someone wants to encrypt an email to you, they use your public key that is in the Active Directory to encrypt it, and then you use the private key to decrypt it. And with non-repudiation, it's going to the reverse. For information protection, we're also leveraging rights management. So the Windows rights management services available in Windows Server 2003 and the instantiation of those within Microsoft Office for information rights management. And that enables you for email to be able to set particular templates to say things like, the people I'm sending this email to can do nothing with it except read it on the machine. They can't print it, they can't forward it, they can't copy it, they can't save it, they can't do anything else with that. And that's good if there's a highly sensitive piece of information you want to share with people. In fact, the only way then to be able to steal that information is using a digital camera, as I tested out. That's the only way you can, if you can get a digital photo of the screen, that's the way you can steal the information. The other way you can use it to protect specific documents. So, for example, Office documents, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You may place those documents on a SharePoint team site, and you've set authorization privileges for that site, so maybe only 100 people can access the site. You can add even more granular levels of control to say, I only want these 5 people to be able to view this particular document on the site. So you can take access control to a more granular level. Lastly, I want to talk through how we organized around security. We have 4 main groups within corporate security that I'm going to describe here. The first team covers the threat and risk analysis. So they manage the risk management program and the framework we use for risk management. They legislate the policy, the security policy we're going to define, and the security requirements. And they also have a design review process that ensures that changes in the infrastructure that we make are checked. They go through a certain level of design review to make sure they're compliant with policies and standards. And if they're not, we help provide suggestions on how to get them compliant. Secondly, the assessment and compliance team has 3 key components. It has the project-based assessments, those project-based audits I referred to earlier, sometimes including attack and penetration tests. And they have the compliance and remediation, which is the scanning that we do every few hours of the whole network to look for vulnerabilities and drive remediation. And they have a security service management function, or SSMs, and those are single points of contact for key parts of our environment, so that when those key parts of the environment say, I got a security issue, who do I go to? They don't have to look at a whole org chart and try and work it out. They go to their point of contact. So for our extranet, for our regional IT folks around the globe, for mergers and acquisition issues, for the data center, for the client space, we have these SSMs defined so there's that single point of contact to work with those environments, all those groups. The third group we have focuses on monitoring, intrusion detection, and instant response, so dealing with those real-time threats. And they also have forensics and investigations capability. The last group, shared services and operations, they support the issuance and troubleshooting associated with the physical remote access using the physical and smart cards, running the self-hosted PKI. So we have our own public key infrastructure where we're running Windows Server 2003 certificate server. So we have 20 to 30 certificate servers housed in a secure vault. Now, why did we do that versus leveraging a third-party certificate issuer such as a VeriSign or a GeoTrust? We did that because 4 years ago we anticipated that our number of certificates we'd be issuing would be large, and it is. Now, I'm issuing hundreds of thousands of certificates every month. And so it's a lot cheaper for me to maintain 20 to 30 servers using about more than 3 or 4 people than it is to be buying certificates on a per certificate basis. This team also makes sure we got the right security tools, so it drives the requirements for security tools, both in terms of what do we need in Microsoft products or out of third parties. And it manages the initiatives such as embodied trustworthy computing. For more information about Microsoft IT deployments and best practices, you can find those on Microsoft.com, especially /TechNet. There's a number of security-specific ones that you can access on there. And please fill out a session evaluation. It's incredibly important for us to get your feedback on all of the sessions we do. So thank you. I've got about 12, 13 minutes left. So if anyone would like to ask a question, please do step up to the mic. Thank you.
I had a question for you about I noticed you are using it for wireless, but have you assessed it and considered it for your wired connections as well?
Good question. 802.1x for wired connections. When we were evaluating how to do network segmentation, we did also look at 802.1x for that particular requirement. It didn't meet all the needs as well as IPsec did, so we didn't choose it in that particular case. But we do continue to evaluate it in terms of how it can help us. But we haven't yet implemented it apart from wireless.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Basically, that every time someone remotely logs in, they go through a bill of health, basically, make sure all the patches are there, so on and so forth. How do you handle that with client users on machines that you don't manage, like?
Oh yeah, you're worried about that. So we're checking their bill of health, but it's not necessarily a Microsoft machine.
Right.
Is that? Yep. So for that remote access scenario, what we've done is we make sure that everybody understands, all remote access users understand that their machine is going to get scanned. So we implemented a policy several months ago where everyone who is trying to connect to the network, all users, will get a pop-up that says, if you use this remote access service and it is for business purposes, then you need to agree to these, kind of like a EULA, right? Kind of like a set of these set of standards, which will include, we'll be checking your machine and scanning it for configuration. And you can either go, I accept, and you go ahead and use it, or you can say, I don't accept, and you don't get to use remote access. And we drive that because we say it's very much for business purposes. Right. If they say no, they don't accept the standards, they don't get to use the network, because it specifically is for Microsoft business purposes. Yes, sure, we know people access our network and use it for their own personal surfing. We don't really, we don't, monitor or cut that off, but we do say it is for business purposes. Yep.
I downloaded recently a PowerPoint presentation from Microsoft's website on IT, and it said, and I'm not sure if it said it for everyone, they all have the option of being local administrator of their PC. Is everyone a local administrator, or do you implement people as users?
Good question. About 95% of our client users have local administration on the PC. Yeah, I mean, we're not great about training our internal users how to use their PCs. You turn up a Microsoft, here's a new PC, it has Office and Windows loaded on it, get on with it. Install whatever you like, right? That's the general model we have. We don't tightly manage the desktops.
I had a question about two things. One is I noted that you said you remembered your password after trying for 20 times. Why don't you lock the account after X number of attempts at guessing your password?
We do. The particular scenario I talked about was that I was logged into my machine, but I locked it. I did the Control-Alt-Delete lock. Hence, I got 20 to 25 attempts to try and unlock my machine. I was quite glad that I had logged off, because yes, if I'd logged off, we allow, I think it's 3 attempts. I think you get 3 or 4 attempts, and then yes, it's locked. Right? Yeah, your account is locked, and you have to call help desk to get a new password.
I also noted you said you had the ability to ask a person when they log on if they agree to the corporate standard, security standard as far as access to the machine, and if they don't agree with that, they can say yes or no, and in the no case, logs them off or turns the machine off. How do you take that and do that in our corporate networks? Right now, I don't know how to do that. Is there some way, something I'm missing?
Good question. Why don't you come and see me afterwards and we can talk about it in more detail. Yeah. Anyone else?
Earlier, you stated that you scan your network on a regular basis to make sure that the patches are applied, and you also said you have 300,000 devices. What are you using to do that scan every 6 hours?
Right now, we're using some custom tools that we developed internally to do that scanning. We're working with the product teams. I think products like MBSA 2.0, when they come out, should contain similar functionality to be able to do that scanning. And actually, when you're scanning that number of machines, every time you scan, you get a different number. Right? I mean, you can't find all of them all the time. It's a little bit of pot luck with a certain set of those unmanaged machines, which ones you're going to find. So.
Are you allowing any access through SSL-based VPN?
The remote access does?
Yes, remote, through an SSL-based VPN solution.
Yeah, do we allow any?
Yeah, do you allow that?
Yeah, yeah. For the applications in the extranet for us specifically, the access to those applications is mainly through SSL VPN. Yes.
Question: what type of smart cards you use?
What type of smart cards?
Yeah. And are they also used with the VPN?
Yeah, right now they're the smart card vendor. So you're thinking? Yeah, they're Motorola Indala cards. Are the ones that we use. So Indala, I-N-D-A-L-A, is the vendor that we're buying the cards from right now. However, we're reevaluating who the vendor is going to be. These are currently 32K cards that are end of life. It means I can't buy any more of them. So I just managed to buy the last 30,000 last July that were available, and we're now evaluating 128K cards where we get a lot more on the cards, a lot more certificates and other applications. And we're not quite sure who the vendor is going to be for those yet.
I have a question about kiosk keys. I heard a little bit about it, but I'm wondering how Microsoft's position is about using these specific keys when people go to a kiosk to try to encrypt their passwords and stuff like that.
The use of a kiosk you're talking about, sorry?
Yeah, if we're using on a kiosk to try to get into your, let's say your email or something like that. Mm-hmm. I've heard some people, back at home, they were telling me about these kiosk keys, and I was wondering if Microsoft has ever researched about it and looked into it.
Kiosk keys, no. Maybe we could chat afterwards about that, okay?
I know that Microsoft just had an announcement with an agreement with RSA to do, using their secure ID. I was just wondering why you chose to use the smart cards rather than, let's say, the secure ID for your RS.
Yeah, it's good question. When we went about evaluating the smart cards, we were doing that about 3 years ago, and we implemented over the course of 2 years with piloting and deployments. And at that time, when we evaluated the smart cards versus the biometrics versus the other solutions like secure ID tokens, smart cards had the best features, mobility usage, ability to use it for other applications. So that's why we went with them at that time. We do actually use RSA Secure ID, say, for securing access to actual network devices, so actual networking gear. We actually use them for securing that. And we are currently reevaluating what particular authentication scenarios RSA Secure ID may be useful for. But we haven't used it in a widespread basis yet.
You said you have to use a reader, right? So your device has to have a reader before you can use that card. So is that a problem for a lot of your mobile users who are?
It's no and yes. It's not an issue. For example, in my laptop, I've just got a PCMCIA reader in there. I never take it out, right? And so most people with a laptop or a tablet, notebook, right, it's in there. They've always got the reader. If it's a home machine, they've just always got the reader, plugged in. It is a problem, but in a wider sense. For example, Pocket PCs could remotely access the network before we implemented this. They can't anymore, right? You can't use those because they not so much the reader piece, but they don't yet support the EAP protocol to allow it. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.